The arena was full, but it didn't feel alive. There was noise, yes, the usual waves of chatter rolling over the ring, phones glowing in thousands of hands, signs lifting and falling without rhythm. Yet something underneath it all felt misaligned. The air seemed heavier than it should have been, like the building itself was bracing for something it didn't want to carry. Even before the lights shifted, before any name appeared on the screen, the mood in the crowd had begun to change. Conversations slowed, smiles faded without explanation. It was the kind of atmosphere that doesn't announce itself loudly. It creeps in. The match in the ring was still going, but it no longer held the audience. Moves landed without reaction. Commentary, usually sharp and animated, started stumbling over ordinary observations. They tried to fill the space with analysis, but their tone betrayed them. There was a slight hesitation between sentences, an uncertainty that didn't match the routine flow of a live broadcast. Something was wrong, and everyone could feel it, even if no one understood why. Then the lights didn't go out. They dimmed, just enough to make people question whether it was intentional. The titan screen remained black. No music hit, no graphic flashed. The ring announcer didn't speak. It wasn't a production mistake. It was too deliberate, too controlled. The crowd reacted with a ripple of confusion. A few cheers attempted to start, thinking it was a surprise return. They died quickly. This didn't feel like celebration. The commentators tried to explain it as a technical delay. Their words overlapped. One of them laughed nervously, then stopped mid-sentence as if he realized the sound of his own voice didn't belong in that moment. Silence settled across the arena in layers. First the upper sections quieted, then the lower bowl. Finally, even the floor seats fell still. The wrestlers in the ring looked toward the stage, no longer performing, no longer posturing. They were waiting, and then she stepped out. There was no music, no pose, no spotlight chasing her entrance. Jade Cargill simply walked into view as if she had been there the entire time and had just decided the illusion was over. Her expression wasn't angry. It wasn't triumphant. It was calm in a way that felt calculated. Her shoulders were squared, her posture unshakable, her presence overwhelming without a single dramatic gesture. The crowd didn't explode. They froze. It wasn't the kind of silence born from shock alone. It was the silence of people realizing that something had shifted in front of them and they didn't yet understand the cost. A few scattered cheers tried to rise but collapsed under the weight of uncertainty. Others stared without blinking. Phones hovered midair, forgotten. Jade didn't rush. Every step down the ramp was deliberate, almost clinical. No wasted motion. No acknowledgement of the divided audience. The commentary team had stopped speaking entirely now. They were watching her the same way everyone else was, with an uneasy awareness that this wasn't a nostalgic return. It wasn't a comeback story. It felt like a warning. By the time she reached the ring, the energy in the arena had drained into something unrecognizable. The two wrestlers inside stepped back without being told. They didn't look defiant. They looked unsettled. Jade climbed the steps slowly, entered through the ropes without theatrics, and stood in the center of the ring. No words, no gestures, just presence. And somehow, that was worse. Standing in the center of the ring, Jade Cargill didn't demand attention. She absorbed it. The silence stretched so long that it began to feel intentional, almost strategic. The crowd's confusion had shifted into something heavier. There were no chants, no synchronized cheers, only isolated murmurs scattered throughout the arena, like fragments of a conversation nobody could finish. The commentators finally spoke, but their tone was no longer playful or excited. It was cautious. They described what they were seeing in plain terms, as if afraid to assign meaning to something they didn't fully understand. Jade's eyes scanned the arena slowly, not searching for approval, not acknowledging support. It felt more like an assessment. The two wrestlers who had been competing moments earlier stood near opposite corners, unsure whether to stay or leave. Their earlier aggression had dissolved. Neither wanted to be the first to make a move, and that hesitation was visible to everyone watching. Jade hadn't touched them. She hadn't even spoken. Yet the dynamic in the ring had completely inverted. When she finally moved, it wasn't sudden. It was deliberate. She stepped forward, not toward either opponent specifically, but toward the center, reclaiming space that had technically already been hers the moment she arrived. One of the wrestlers tried to step up, perhaps to defend pride more than position, but the movement lacked conviction. The crowd reacted, not with excitement, but with a collective intake of breath. It wasn't anticipation of a big moment. It was fear of what the moment might cost. Jade didn't need theatrics. A single firm strike ended the standoff. It wasn't excessive, it wasn't chaotic, it was efficient. The second wrestler lunged instinctively and was met with the same controlled force. The audience didn't erupt. They watched. Some fans covered their mouths, others leaned back in their seats as if physical distance might soften what they were witnessing. Commentary stumbled again, describing impact but avoiding adjectives. The language stayed clinical. Within seconds, both competitors were down. Jade stood over them, breathing steady, expression unchanged. She didn't celebrate, she didn't taunt, she didn't even glance at the hard camera. The lack of reaction was more unsettling than any show of dominance could have been. This wasn't about proving superiority. It felt like a statement delivered without emotion. Security hovered near the stage but didn't intervene. Officials appeared at ringside, uncertain whether this was sanctioned or unscripted. The confusion extended beyond the crowd now. Production seemed hesitant. No music cued her exit. No authority figure stormed out to confront her. It was as if the company itself had been caught off guard by the weight of her return. Jade finally picked up a microphone. The arena tensed again, bracing for explanation. She lifted it slowly, paused, then lowered it without saying a word. The gesture was simple, but it carried more impact than any speech could have. She didn't owe the audience clarity. She didn't owe the locker room reassurance. Her silence felt intentional, like a refusal to soften the reality she had just imposed. Then she stepped out of the ring and walked back up the ramp, leaving behind not chaos, but something colder. Uncertainty. The show continued, but it no longer felt like the same event. Backstage, the atmosphere shifted from confusion to tension almost immediately. Producers moved quickly through the corridors. Phones pressed to their ears, voices lowered but urgent. No one wanted to admit that they hadn't been prepared. No one wanted to confirm whether they had known. The uncertainty was more damaging than the moment itself. Wrestlers stood in small groups near catering tables and locker room doors, watching replay footage on monitors mounted along the walls. Conversations were quiet, guarded. Some tried to frame it as a power move. Others questioned the timing. A few veterans simply shook their heads. It wasn't fear in the exaggerated sense. It was professional recalibration. Jade's return hadn't been theatrical. It had been controlled, direct, and disruptive. That kind of presence forces reflection. Younger talent exchanged uneasy glances. If she could walk in without music, without announcement, and dismantle two performers with such detachment, what did that mean for the rest of the roster? One rising star, previously positioned for a title program, was seen pacing near the gorilla position long after her segment ended. Her frustration wasn't public, but it was visible. Months of momentum could be redirected overnight. In this industry, timing is currency, and Jade's arrival had just altered the economy. No one said it out loud, but the implication lingered. Opportunities were about to shrink. Authority figures convened behind closed doors. Executives who typically projected calm authority were now managing optics. The social media team scrambled as clips of the entrance flooded every platform. Analysts debated whether it was brilliance or recklessness. Sponsors requested clarification. Was this a storyline escalation or an internal shift in power? The company released a brief statement calling it a planned return, but the language felt sterile compared to the emotion it had triggered. In the locker room, reactions remained divided. Some respected the audacity, others resented it. A few admitted privately that they felt exposed. Wrestling thrives on controlled narratives, on arcs that build gradually. Jade had bypassed that process. She had arrived fully formed, unannounced, and unapologetic. That kind of dominance doesn't just threaten opponents in the ring. It challenges the hierarchy outside of it. Meanwhile, media outlets amplified the debate. Headlines described the moment as chilling, uncomfortable, polarizing. Pundits questioned whether the silence had been more impactful than any explosive return in recent memory. Interviews were requested, statements drafted, but Jade remained unavailable. No clarification, no reassurance. At home, fans replayed the entrance obsessively, searching for clues in her expression, in the timing of her steps, in the absence of words. Was this reinvention? Was it defiance? Or was it something more personal? Inside the building, one truth settled heavily over everyone involved. The night had not ended when she left the ring. It had only begun. Because what Jade Cargill reintroduced wasn't just herself, it was pressure. Pressure does not stay contained inside an arena, it follows people home. By the next morning, the industry felt different. Talent arriving at the training facility noticed the shift immediately. Conversations stopped when certain names were mentioned. Schedules were revised without explanation. Creative meetings ran longer than usual, and when wrestlers left those rooms, their expressions were tight, controlled, unreadable. Jade's presence had not been loud, but its consequences were echoing. Several competitors began reassessing their own trajectories. A championship contender, who had been positioned as the future centerpiece of the division, privately questioned whether that future had just been postponed indefinitely. A tag team quietly wondered if the spotlight they had fought to earn would now dim under a larger shadow. The fear wasn't irrational. It was professional survival instinct. In an environment where visibility determines longevity, Jade had just commanded every camera without asking. Executives faced a different kind of tension. Investors wanted assurance that the moment was strategic, not volatile. Sponsors sought clarity on messaging. The company's leadership understood the fine line between compelling unpredictability and destabilizing disruption. Jade's return had walked that line perfectly, perhaps too perfectly. The control she displayed in the ring contrasted sharply with the uncertainty it created behind the scenes. That imbalance required management. Media coverage intensified. Opinion panels dissected her body language, calling it cold, focused, even intimidating. Some praised the restraint, arguing that silence created gravitas rarely seen in modern wrestling. Others criticized the lack of explanation, claiming fans deserved context. Public debate grew louder by the hour, but Jade herself remained silent. She did not post. She did not comment. The absence of response became part of the narrative. Beyond the professional consequences, there were personal ones. Family members fielded questions from friends and acquaintances who had watched the segment unfold in disbelief. Support turned into concern. Was the environment stable? Was the pressure sustainable? Jade had always projected strength, but strength carries expectation. Dominance invites scrutiny. Every move from this point forward would be analyzed not just as performance, but as proof. Within the locker room, respect and resentment coexisted. Some admired her ability to command the atmosphere without theatrics. Others felt blindsided, as though years of incremental effort had been overshadowed in minutes. The unspoken reality settled in. This was not a temporary shock. It was a recalibration of power. Later that week, when Jade finally walked into the building again, the hallway conversations stopped. She acknowledged no one directly, yet her presence altered posture and tone around her. It wasn't hostility. It wasn't friendship. It was awareness. The industry thrives on moments, but it survives on consequences. And now, every person connected to that entrance was living inside them. The fear had not been in the strike. It had been in what followed. Time passed, but the memory of that entrance did not soften. It lingered in highlight reels, in debates, in quiet conversations between colleagues who still weren't sure how to categorize what they had witnessed. It wasn't the most explosive return. It wasn't the loudest. There had been no fireworks, no triumphant music swelling to reassure the audience that this was something to celebrate. Instead, it remained suspended in collective memory as something heavier. For Jade Cargill, the weight devolved. Dominance in silence creates expectation. Every subsequent appearance carried comparison. Would it feel the same? Could opponents approached matches differently now? They were cautious in ways that bordered on defensive. The division shifted around her, not because she demanded it verbally, but because she had already proven she could take space without asking. That kind of authority is difficult to maintain, and even more difficult to escape. Inside the company, leadership recalibrated storylines with precision. They needed to harness the intensity without letting it fracture morale. Younger talent studied her more closely, analyzing posture, timing, composure. Veterans measured her consistency. Respect was not handed to her automatically. It was observed, evaluated, slowly conceded. The silence that once unsettled the arena now followed her backstage, but it carried nuance. It was no longer confusion. It was anticipation mixed with caution. Public conversation eventually shifted from shock to interpretation. Analysts framed the entrance as a statement about power without spectacle. Others questioned whether the discomfort it created was sustainable in a business built on crowd participation. Yet even critics admitted that for one night an entire arena had been unified, not by cheers, but by stillness. That kind of collective pause is rare. Privately, Jade faced the quieter cost. Dominance can isolate. When you enter a room and conversation stops, it is not always admiration. It can be distance. The expectations placed upon her were no longer about winning matches alone. They were about carrying an atmosphere, about maintaining control without appearing reckless, about proving that the fear she introduced was purposeful rather than accidental. Months later, footage of that night still circulated online. Viewers slowed it down, searching her expression for hidden emotion. They debated whether the company had been ready, whether the roster had been prepared, whether the audience had been complicit in their own silence. No definitive answer emerged, because that entrance was never about surprise. It was about discomfort, and discomfort does not resolve cleanly. The crowd couldn't move that night, not because they were told to be silent, not because they were confused by production, but because something about her presence made motion feel inappropriate. It forced everyone watching to confront a question that lingered long after the show ended. When power walks in without asking permission, are we witnessing strength, or are we witnessing the beginning of something none of us can control?